Hello, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International on tonight's headlines. Russian troops seized Kherson, the first major Ukrainian city to fall in a devastating war that is drawing global outrage ahead of tense ceasefire talks. An increasing number of Russians are taking to the streets protesting their country's invasion of Ukraine despite the repercussions they could face from their own government. And the head of Stockholm's International Peace Institute, Dan Smith, said Russia's use of nuclear weapons would inflict unprecedented damage at a global scale after President Vladimir Putin ordered Russia's nuclear forces be put on high alert. And the Hong Kong government is one with the Philippine government in reminding employers in the host territory that terminating an employee who got infected with COVID is a violation of their labor laws. First in our news, the United Nations overwhelmingly voted to denounce the Russian invasion of Ukraine as the week-long war grinds on in the north, the east, and the south of Ukraine. Russia said 498 of its troops have been killed in Ukraine, its first death toll since President Vladimir Putin launched his invasion a week ago. The true number of Gennady Lakuta, who conceded this late on Wednesday after a three-day siege that left Kherson short of food and medicine and struggling to collect and bury its dead. The town's mayor also announced he was in talks with armed guests. Meanwhile, here are images released by Ukraine's regional police of Donetsk showing firefighting operations in Mariupol, including a man evacuating from a heavily damaged two-story residence that is on fire. Rescue operations have been underway in Mariupol after the city came under intense shelling on Wednesday. Meanwhile, the United Nations, a wounded Ukrainian soldier also dropped his crutches to the Kiev metro station floor, picked up his 5-year-old son, first wiping tears from his shaking wife's face. Sergei and Natalia Badilevich were oblivious to the cooking orders and dozing families spread out on the floor of what has become one of Kiev's deepest and safest bomb shelters. They had been reunited for the first time since witnessing a Russian missile strike on Kiev's TV tower on Tuesday evening. Take a look.
Мы как раз вчера шли, бежали в бомбоубежище из дома и попали, как раз выбежали из укрытия одного и увидели, как в башню летит ракета. Ракета большая, выбежала я, этот маленький мой и взрослый сын. И мы замерли, смотрели, я, солдат там нас защищающий. Он нас раз прикрыл и быстро обратно в укрытие.
Вчера они вышли, пару минут проходит взрыв, я звоню жене, хотел кричать домой, но слышу, парень, крик, бегом в убежище. Потом второй взрыв, и вот до того времени, пока она не перезвонила, я не знаю, вот внутри просто что-то оборвалось.
Ukraine's capital began building its subway system while memories of World War II were still raw in the early 1960s. Its 52 stations and tunnels were built with the dual purpose of moving people and sheltering them should bombs start falling again. Each one can shelter up to 1,000 people from the shell fire and Grad missiles Russian forces have been firing at targets on Kiev's outskirts since last week. Meanwhile, the United Nations also reported that more than 1 million people have fled Ukraine into neighboring countries since Russia launched its full-scale invasion just a week ago. The UN Refugee Agency, or UNHCR, has projected that more than 4 million Ukrainian refugees may eventually need protection and assistance, while the European Union's Crisis Management Commissioner has said the figure could reach 7 million. More than 37 million lived under the Kiev government's control before last week's invasion. Meanwhile, the UN General Assembly voted 141-5 to demand that Russia immediately withdraw from Ukraine. Only 4 countries supported Russia: Belarus, Eritrea, North Korea, and Syria, while China abstained. Take a look.
In favor, 141, against 5, abstentions 35. Draft resolution A/ES/11/L1 is adopted.
The message of the General Assembly is loud and clear. End hostilities in Ukraine now. Silence the guns now. Open the door to dialogue and diplomacy now. The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine must be respected in line with the UN Charter. We don't have a moment to lose. The brutal effects of the conflict are plain to see. But as bad as the situation is for the people in Ukraine right now, it threatens to get much, much worse. The ticking clock is a time bomb. I'm also deeply concerned with its potential consequences for regional and global peace and security, and the world struggling to recover from COVID.
Abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution, that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned the human costs were already staggering, accusing Russia of attacking places that aren't military targets. Take a look.
Already the human costs of the Kremlin's unwarranted, unprovoked, and unjustified war on Ukraine are staggering. Hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians have been killed and wounded. There are now more than 174,000 refugees who've sought safety in nearby countries. Millions of Ukrainians still in Ukraine are sheltering wherever they can.
The Secretary of State spoke after a warning earlier Wednesday by U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, that Russia was moving exceptionally lethal weaponry into Ukraine. And that includes cluster munitions and vacuum bombs, which she told the General Assembly are banned under international law and have no place on the battlefield. President Putin invaded Ukraine on February 24, igniting a global outcry and fierce resistance by Ukrainians. Hundreds of civilians have been killed. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have fled since the invasion began, while the West has imposed sanctions to cripple Russia's economy. President Putin has also ordered his nuclear forces be mobilized in a move that sparked immediate condemnation. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Antony Blinken slammed the Russian nuclear rhetoric as the height of irresponsibility, but also said that Washington was ready to support any diplomatic efforts to reach a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Moscow's troops. Take a look.
Provocative rhetoric about nuclear weapons is the height of irresponsibility. It's dangerous. It adds to the risk of miscalculation. It needs to be avoided. But if Russia pulls back and pursues diplomacy, we stand ready to do the same thing. Meanwhile, our intensive diplomacy with allies and partners continues. I've been in virtually daily contact with my friend and counterpart, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Kuleba. And I've made clear that we'll support any diplomatic efforts by the Ukrainian government to reach a ceasefire and withdrawal of Russian forces.
Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accused Western politicians of considering a nuclear war. Take a look.
Но обращаю ваше внимание, что это в голове западных политиков постоянно вертится ядерная война, а не в голове россиян.
and has already triggered a dramatic realignment of security policy in Europe, with NATO reinforcing its eastern flank and now Germany planning a big increase in military spending. The German government is planning to deliver another 2,700 anti-air missiles to Ukraine, according to a source. Meanwhile, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog urged restraint in Ukraine amid serious concerns that the escalating conflict could compromise atomic facilities there. Let's take a listen.
The situation in Ukraine is unprecedented, and I continue to be gravely concerned. It is the first time a military conflict is happening amidst the facilities of a large established nuclear power program, which in this case also include the site of the 1986 accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The safety and security of nuclear facilities and nuclear and other radioactive material in Ukraine must, under no circumstances, be endangered. Despite the extraordinary circumstances of an armed conflict causing increasing challenges and dangers, Ukraine's nuclear power plants are operating normally. But while we may use expressions like normal operations in a technical context, I want to emphasize that there is nothing normal about the circumstances under which the professionals at the 4 nuclear power plants are managing to keep the reactors that produce half of Ukraine's electricity working. It is of critical importance that the armed conflict and activities on the ground around Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and any other of Ukraine's nuclear facilities in no way interrupts or endangers the facilities or the people working at or around them. But the best action to ensure the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear facilities and its people would be for this armed conflict to end.
Ukraine has a large and established nuclear program, which also includes the site of the 1986 accident at the Chernobyl plant, which is believed to be now under the control of Russian forces. Ukraine has 4 active nuclear power plants providing about half the country's electricity, as well as stores of nuclear waste, such as the one at Chernobyl. Poland and Canada requested the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors meeting to discuss the implications of the invasion, including fears over what could happen if nuclear-related sites are damaged in the fighting. Meanwhile, the head of Stockholm's International Peace Institute, or SIPRI, Dan Smith, said that Russia's use of nuclear weapons would inflict unprecedented damage at a global scale after Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered Russia's nuclear forces to be put on high alert. Take a look.
I think it's very difficult for us to read the real significance of the decision over the nuclear weapons being put on alert. 2 weeks ago, I would have said, this is just rhetoric and don't take it seriously. But I think that what has happened in the last 2 weeks, the invasion and the use of this extraordinary force against cities and civilian areas in Ukraine, makes one wonder whether any of the rules of the road that we have taken for granted for so long are still to be respected. I think it barely matters where the weapons are located, and it almost barely matters the details. They have over 2,000 operationally deployed warheads, and that is enough to inflict totally unprecedented damage on a global scale. It's beyond what is imaginable. That the emphasis is on using the nuclear threat to be sure, or try to be sure, that there will be no further, more active Western intervention and support for Ukraine than there already is. The other possibility which has been raised, but I can't really see it happening, would be for very localized use of nuclear weapons, or maybe just 1 or 2 within Ukraine for a total effect, to use a phrase, shock and awe, to just try to bring that war to an end.
Moscow has the world's largest arsenal of nuclear weapons and a huge cache of ballistic missiles, which form the backbone of the country's deterrence forces. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, now in its 8th day, has driven 1 million Ukrainians from their homes, plunged Russia into deepening isolation as a global pariah in the worlds of finance, diplomacy, and sports. Now, on day 7 of the Ukraine crisis, UN-led efforts to ramp up support to the country's embattled health workers have continued, with the first shipment of life-saving supplies due to arrive in neighboring Poland in the coming hours. Initial concerns about a lack of medicines to treat chronic conditions such as diabetes have given way to an alert that people will die if they do not get oxygen and other supplies for emergency care. That is according to Dr. Mike Ryan, head of the World Health Organization's Emergencies Program. Let's listen in.
So humanitarian access, corridors, moments of peace, anything that can be done to create a situation where we can move supplies, move patients, move other things will be hugely beneficial at this point. But right now, in the chaos of what's happening there, it's very hard to see how that can be achieved in the coming days. And that's why the tragedy unfolding for the people of Ukraine is so avoidable and so unnecessary. Just last week there was about 2,000 people on oxygen, high-flow oxygen for COVID in Ukraine. There's 2,000 people that need oxygen to survive, and that number, it hasn't changed. And in fact, if anything, that number has gone up because we have people with injuries, people undergoing surgery who need oxygen. We have children with childhood pneumonia. We have women in difficulties in labour. So oxygen is not just life-saving in COVID. Oxygen is life-saving, full stop. And you need it when you need it. You can't wait till tomorrow for oxygen. You can't wait till next week. You can't be put on a waiting list for oxygen. You can't stand in a queue for oxygen. Oxygen saves your life right now. And when you need it, you need it. Anytime you disrupt a society like this and put literally millions of people on the move, then infectious diseases will exploit that. People are packed together, they're stressed, and they're not eating, they're not sleeping properly. They're highly susceptible to the impacts of, first of all, of being infected themselves, and it's much more likely that disease will spread. So what might be for the rest of the world a, inverted commas, mild variant could be a very different experience for someone who is in that situation. And we see this all the time in refugees. We see this all the time around the world. We see this in the Middle East. We see this in Africa. The consequences of infectious disease in displaced people, in refugees who've been, as I said, on the move, overcrowded, stressed, without proper nutrition or sleep. Infectious diseases exploit that. So there's no question that the disease, COVID-19, will exploit that in the coming weeks.
Oleg Rubak wept for love of his wife, Katya, crushed in the rubble of his family home, and for hatred of Vladimir Putin, whom he blames for the missile strike that killed her. The 32-year-old engineer was playing with his baby daughter in the living room of the couple's brick and timber house in Zhytomyr, 150 kilometers west of Kiev. Now, on Tuesday night at around 10 in the evening in the Ukrainian crossroads town, home to a military garrison, a first missile struck near the family home. A second crashed down behind the building, tearing a 5-meter deep crater now full of dirty water and the smashed remnants of Rubak's house. Take a look.
Moms. Я уже не могу, пап. Я уже просто достал. I want to cry, but the second bomb was dropping down near 5 meters of our house. You see, I was sitting with my daughter on this room, but As you can see, in this moment, it is not home, not room. It is, maybe it is hell. I was sitting with my daughter on this room, but as you can see, in this moment, it is not home, not room. It is, maybe it is hell. You see that on my fingers I don't have skin.
Looking for your wife.
When we find my wife, we see that he don't have some part of head. I find my daughter, but he don't crying, don't give any signal of life. But when I see that everything was dropping down in my soul, but when I take my daughter to my hand, my daughter starting crying. And maybe it is one of the best noise in my life. It is not home, not room. It is, maybe it is hell. To a head of my...
What were you, what time?
On a door of house, the main door, and after first because my car.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelinsky today promised Ukrainians that damage to infrastructure inflicted by invading Russian forces would be repaired and that Moscow would foot the bill. Take a look.
Ми відновимо кожний будинок, кожну вулицю, кожне місто і говоримо Росії: вчіть слова репарації та контрибуції. Ви відшкодуєте усе нам, що зробили проти нашої держави, проти кожного українця в повному обсязі. А тих, хто загинув, ми не забудемо.
And here are some images published by the State Emergency Service of Ukraine Service of Ukraine showing shell buildings burning in central Kharkiv, with firefighters trying to put out the fire and rescuing victims from the rubble. Meanwhile, Toyota said it would suspend operations at its only factory in Russia and stop shipping vehicles to the country, citing supply chain disruptions linked to Moscow's assault on Ukraine. The world's top-selling car maker said its plant in St. Petersburg produced around 80,000 vehicles last year, mainly for the Russian market and representing just a fraction of the 10.5 million vehicles made worldwide by the Japanese group. The St. Petersburg plant employs around 2,600 people, according to a Toyota spokeswoman, confirming the supply disruption was linked to the conflict. And Swedish furniture giant IKEA said it would also suspend its activities in Russia and Belarus, affecting nearly 15,000 employees, 17 stores, and 3 production sites in response to the war in Ukraine. The war has had a huge human impact already. It is also resulting in serious disruptions to supply chain and trading conditions. For all of these reasons, the company said, IKEA has decided to temporarily pause operations in Russia. That, according to a statement, the suspension mainly concerns Russia, where the Swedish group has been present since 2000 and is one of the largest Western employers. While the stores operated by the Inca Group account for the bulk of the workforce, affected 12,000 people, IKEA also has nearly 2,500 employees working in manufacturing with 3 factories in Russia. According to the company, 47 suppliers in Russia and 10 in Belarus would be affected by the decision, which also puts a stop to imports and exports between the 2 countries. Anti-war demonstrators were detained in Moscow and St. Petersburg after jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny called on Russians to protest President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Police in Putin's hometown of St. Petersburg violently dispersed protesters and detained around 100 people, according to an AFP journalist at the scene. In Moscow, law enforcement closed off Red Square near the Kremlin and detained at least 7 people who gathered while loudspeakers warned people from convening in the area. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
Mr. Bawal, may ibis ka, oh. Asan? It's a prank! Okay lang manakot! Pero kung mananakot ka para sa boto, bawal yan!
Ayon sa Omnibus Election Code, threats, intimidation, terrorism, use of fraudulent device or other forms of coercion is an election offense.
Sino kausap mo? Makaalis na nga, sa iba na lang ako mananakot. Mr. Pwede! Mr. Pwede! May malaking ibis sa likod mo! Nox! Babawi ka pa, ha? Di mo ako maiisahan! Ako si Mr. Bawal na nagpapaalala sa inyo na ang pananakot para sa boto. Ibis! Hoy! Bawal yan!
To Mobile Legends!
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka nang mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Welcome back. The Philippines joined other nations in calling for a halt to the ongoing violence in Ukraine. Cabinet Secretary Carlo Nograles, also the acting presidential spokesperson, said President Duterte gave assurances that mitigating measures and contingency plans will be put in place as part of the government's proactive response to the Russia-Ukraine war. Take a look.
The palace joins the country and the entire world in praying for an early and peaceful resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. We reiterate the position of the Philippines that war benefits no one and that it exacts a tragic, bloody toll on the lives of innocent men, women, and children in the areas of conflict. The conflict in Ukraine has economic, trade, and human resource implications for our country and for our people. As we monitor the current situation, every Filipino has the right to know what the government is doing to prepare for any eventuality. President Rodrigo Roa Duterte has given assurances that mitigating measures and contingency plans will be in place as part of the government's proactive response to the conflict in Ukraine. For this reason, the President convened yesterday, March 1, 2022, several members of his cabinet, along with top officials of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police, and other high-ranking officials to discuss possible scenarios should the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict continue and escalate. In this regard, the President has approved the recommendations of his economic team to strengthen our domestic economy, stabilize food prices, provide social protection, and explore diplomatic channels to help resolve the conflict. As to food stability, the Chief Executive approved the recommendations of the Department of Agriculture to boost local food production. Kasama na rito ang pagpapataas ng produksyon ng pagkain sa pamamagitan ng pagpapatupad ng Plant Part 2. Pagpapataas ng rice buffer stock na hindi bababa sa 30 araw. Pamamahagi ng tulong pinansyal sa ating mga nagsasaka ng palay at pagtugon sa tumataas na presyo ng abono o pataba, tulad ng pagbibigay ng fertilizer subsidy at market access through bilateral discussions sa fertilizer-producing countries. Inaprubahan din ng Pangulo ang rekomendasyon ng Department of Agriculture sa pamamahagi ng fuel discount vouchers sa mga magsasaka at mga mangingisda bilang tugon sa tumataas na presyo ng langis.
And with that, the palace also called on Congress to review the oil deregulation law, particularly provisions on unbundling the price and the inclusion of the minimum inventory requirements in the law, as well as giving the government intervention powers, authority to intervene when there is a spike and or prolonged increase of prices of oil products as part of the government's medium-term measures. Let's listen in.
On the supply of oil, the President approved the recommendations of the Department of Energy to implement the 2.5 billion Pantawid Pasada and the 500 million fuel discount program for farmers and fisherfolk. The DOE will continue to monitor the sufficiency in supply and quality and will make sure there will be no short selling. For the medium term, we call on Congress to review the oil deregulation law, particularly provisions on unbundling the price and the inclusion of the minimum inventory requirements in the law, as well as giving the government intervention powers or authority to intervene when there is a spike and or prolonged increase of prices of oil products. Also, part of our medium-term measures are building of the strategic petroleum reserve infrastructure, ensuring minimum inventory requirements, and advocating for energy conservation and efficiency. The President further approved the recommendations of the Department of Trade and Industry to accelerate renewable energy adoption, support investments in utility-scale battery storage to maximize utilization of renewable energy sources, support investments in modern storage facilities for oil and grains to increase within the border holding capacity, and empower the private sector to help in strategic stockpiling. Meanwhile, the AFP and the PNP gave assurances that our troops and our military and police assets stand ready and that they have respective contingencies prepared for any developments. In conclusion, we appeal for an immediate end to the unnecessary loss of life and call on the states involved to forge an accord that can help prevent a conflagration that could engulf a world still struggling to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The course of history and the fate of our world will be shaped by the decisions that will be made by its leaders. We are one in prayer, together with all peace-loving citizens, that they be guided by wisdom and a genuine desire to save lives, establish harmony among neighboring nations, and forge a just and lasting peace for humanity.
In the related news, the Philippines Energy Department admitted the country is at the mercy of global price movements and would be affected with the continuing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Energy Secretary Alfonso Cusi said that while the Philippines primarily gets its crude oil requirements from the Middle East, the impact of the Ukraine crisis will be felt in the international oil markets and thus have a direct impact on oil prices in the country. However, he also assured Filipinos of the sufficiency of the country's oil supplies amid the continuing tensions. Take a look.
Ito pong sa Russia-Ukraine conflict, this added problems to the increasing price already in the world market. At saka ngayon nga po, it's hitting near $100 per barrel. So yan po ang ating binabantayang mabuti ngayon, and sabi nga po ninyo, yung tungkol sa excise tax, ang naging position po natin yan as early as last year, sinasabi nga po natin to give us the power to suspend excise tax when an abnormal situation is happening. At saka ngayon po, humingi po kami ng authority na yun. But unfortunately, we need to amend law for us to be able to do that. The Congress have already passed that, discussed that, and that napending lang po sa Senado. So yun po ang sitwasyon. As far as what is happening now, wala naman po kakulangan ng supply dito sa ating bansa. Ang panawagan lang po natin ay tayo po ay to conserve the use maging marunong po tayo sa paggamit ng petrolyo, hindi lang ng petrolyo, pati na po ng elektrisidad, at kahit sa wala pa pong kakulangan. Ang magiging mangyayari lang po dito, yung pong pagtaas ng presyo. And pagka umabot po ito ng dati natin in 2014, I think, ang presyo po ay sumabot ng mga $110 plus. And the looks of it, kung magiging prolong po yung gera between Russia and Ukraine, talaga pong tataas pa po ang ng petrolyo.
In other news, the Hong Kong government is one with the Philippine government in reminding employers in the host territory that terminating an employee who got infected with COVID is a violation of their labor laws. Labor Attaché Melchor Dizon of the Philippine Overseas Labor Office in Hong Kong said so far there are only 3 cases of termination involving Filipino workers, but in these cases, the employers were convinced to reconsider their decisions. Again, let's listen in.
Sa kadahilanan din sa mga nare-receive na napapaulat na mga termination dahil sa COVID, ang Hong Kong government ay nagpadala ng official communication dito sa Philippine Consulate General na sila ay tutulong sa pag-assist doon at monitor at nagbigay na rin sila ng warning sa mga employer na ito ay labag sa employment ordinance, yung pag-terminate ng worker kung sila ay nasa sa COVID at sila ay mananagot at pag napatunayan na terminate nila yung kanilang worker dahil sa COVID, magbabayad sila ng fine na 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. That is equivalent siguro sa mga 650,000 pesos aside from doon sa mga posibilidad na dapat na ibigay sa ating kababayan. At kami dito sa Polo, naggawa kami ng team na lahat ng mga nare-receive namin na report, tinitingnan namin yung mga status ng kanilang employment. At kung meron kaming makikita na terminate dahil sa COVID, i-assist namin kasi nung kami nakipag-coordinate doon sa aming counterpart sa Hong Kong Labor, ang pwede naming i-file, i-assist namin pagpa-file ng complaints doon sa Labor Tribunal Division at saka sa Equal Opportunities Commission.
In other news, former Nissan executive Greg Kelly will appeal after a Tokyo court handed a 6-month suspended sentence to him over allegations he helped disgraced auto tycoon Carlos Ghosn attempt to conceal income, one of his lawyers said, and let's listen in.
At the end of the day. Victory Ross?
Yes. Did you win or lose?
It is a difficult question, but almost win, but we will appeal.
If the prosecutor's appeal, can Greg Kelly leave the country?
Yes.
He can still leave?
Yes, he can.
The 65-year-old American was detained at the same time as Ghosn in November 2018, but the former Nissan chief jumped bail and fled to Lebanon the following year, leaving Kelly alone to face the charges. Prosecutors had sought 2 years in prison for Kelly, accusing him of helping Ghosn underreport his income to the tune of 9.1 billion yen, or $79 million between 2010 and 2018. But the court found him not guilty on the charges for the financial years 2010 to 2016 and guilty for the financial year 2017, handing down a 6-month prison sentence suspended for 3 years. The American has always denied the accusations, and the trial has been closely watched in Japan and abroad, with the U.S. ambassador to Tokyo saying the case was a top priority.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we are announcing.
In other news, residents in the town of Grafton on Australia's east coast returned to properties after a deadly torrential downpour. Let's take a look.
This is quite tragic in here. See that sort of green colour thing, bright green. Yep.
All this expensive stuff is all up on platforms, which is for the flood. But I feel lucky in a way because my home is still high and dry. My heart goes out to those who have lost their homes and lost everything that they've got. I mean, like, these are things and things, you know, that help make an income, obviously, but it's not life.
held it less. I was like, I'm not being very helpful. I'm sorry.
I'll row you back in a minute or so.
Higher.
Yeah, well, so they're dropping down, some of them there into the water.
Yeah.
And
In a related story, Australia's emergency services today ordered 200,000 people to flee from the path of a wild storm that has killed 13 people in a week of record-setting East Coast floods. But the city of Sydney escaped the worst of the deluge. Now, authorities issued severe rain and wind warnings for a 400-kilometer stretch of the coast as water levels rose rapidly, including in suburbs around Sydney, Australia's largest city and home to 5 million people. The unpredictable storm front has crawled southwards along the east coast from Queensland to New South Wales, creating havoc as rivers and reservoirs broke their banks with water swamping homes up to their roofs. A low-pressure system sat off the coast hundreds of kilometers north of Sydney, dumping the heaviest rain in that area and sparing the city from a feared downpour, according to meteorologist Ben Domencino of Weather Zone. He said Sydney escaped the heaviest falls today, predicting that the storm would weaken by Friday. And take a look at these images in Indonesia, the center of Serang Banten province on Indonesia's main island of Java. Submerged after 2 days of torrential rain, it caused widespread flooding and it has already killed 5 people. In other news, New York Yankees prospect Anthony Volpe is currently living out his childhood dream. The standout shortstop from New Jersey plays in the double minor league. Carlo Valdez has the details. Carlo.
Anthony Volpe, living the dream. Like any boy growing up in New York City, he became a fan of the Yankees, that iconic team of America's national pastime.
The New York Yankees select Anthony.
Anthony Volpe, just 20 years old, has been drafted by the farm team of the New York Yankees. His dad, Michael, says Anthony's passion for baseball had its roots in its infancy.
In our small apartment in New York City, as the game was on, I would throw him these little balls, and he would hit him with this little wooden bat, and we would just play games. And I would try to get him out, and he would try to jump over me, or if I got him out, he would argue. And Seth's probably when he was about 2, maybe.
And Anthony soon outgrew that and began running the bases.
Really, ever since I can remember, I've been playing baseball. I mean, my earliest memories, I have a ball in my hand, and I'm just playing at the field with my dad and with my whole family. So those are kind of my best memories, playing the game.
That passion for the sport grew during the years, and by middle school, Anthony made the USA national team. By the time he reached high school, Anthony was living in New Jersey, becoming a superstar on the diamond. But he didn't allow the sport to overtake his studies. Anthony maintained straight A's until graduation. Right after receiving his high school diploma, it was decision time for Anthony. He had been accepted to Vanderbilt University, known for its premier college baseball program. But also knocking at his door were the Yankees, who wanted to draft him. A dream come true.
Yeah, it was pretty surreal. I mean, obviously, growing up in New York City and being such a huge Yankee fan, I'd say it's every kid's dream that I grew up with. So it's definitely surreal. It's hard to kind of put into words, but I think the most special part about it was just being there with my family and my friends and all my coaches and all the people that kind of helped me get to where I was.
But don't look for the talented shortstop in Yankee Stadium just yet. This #1 prospect is working his way through the Yankee farm system. Last year was good to him, named Yankees 2021 Minor League Player of the Year. This spring, he will play for the Somerset Patriots, the Double-A affiliate of the Yankees. None of this is a surprise to Anthony's family, says his dad, Michael.
I knew when he was a baby because he walked so early, like about 9 months old, and he was really athletic compared to the other kids in his grade, that he was a good athlete. Like, I knew that from when he was really, really young.
And Anthony, who is now on top of the world, says he's truly blessed.
Yeah, I just say, like I said, thank you to my parents, my whole family. I wouldn't obviously be able to do it without them. I know it sounds cliche, but I'm very lucky.
On what he hopes is the verge of a legacy, Anthony Volpe is focused on today, getting ready for his debut in Yankee Stadium. Carlo Valdez, EBC Sports International, New Jersey.
Thank you, Carlo. As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angela. Stay alert and stay informed because we live in interesting times. Good night.
Karapatan natin lahat na iboto ang karapat-dapat! Lahat ng Pilipino pwedeng bumoto!
Kung rehistrado ka. Ang lahat ng Pilipinong rehistrado lamang ang maaaring bumoto. 1 taon ang ibinibigay ng Commission on Elections para magparehistro ang mga Pilipinong boboto sa darating na eleksyon. Kailangan gawin ito para maiwasan ang tinatawag na flying voters. Teka, lahat ba kayo nagparehistro na?
Opo! Rehistrado na kami lahat!
Bakit tahimik ka? Hindi ka nakapagrehistro, no?
Nakakalimutan ko.
Ay, hindi ka pwedeng bumoto. Mabuti pa, bumili ka na lang ng balot.
Pagka kami pa bumili ng balot, pwede na kami bumoto.
Hindi, pero mabubusog ka. Para sa karagdagang kaalaman, makipag-ugnayan lang sa pinakamalapit na barangay o bisitahin ang COMELEC website.